Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Seeking Harmony conversation, where we talk about the news from the world and try to get to the core of it and see it from all the perspectives, especially unionism. And this week, we wanted to talk about a few topics, but I think the main one that we wanted to talk about was the situation with the Navajo Nation and how they're facing a water crisis basically right now in America, and how there's been a debate about why they're facing this crisis and why they're not basically in the American water system. So yeah, I'm gonna open it up to you guys. Like you guys in the US probably know a bit more about this, and I'd love for us to discuss how it feels and how is it linked to us, and what impact does this news bring to us. So yeah, open floor.
So this story, I felt called to it after reading an article about it, and in the Guardian, the piece about it recently. But so it just shows really interesting I guess decisions to be made and challenges to face. Right now, the Navajo Nation, it's mostly in Arizona, and I'm from Arizona, and Arizona's a very arid state, and where they live, it's like kind of a steppe. It's not like a desert, but it's still a really arid area, and the article was just describing how, like, since the 90s, there's been a drought there, and just in the Southwest in general, just this big mega drought. And the article was just discussing how the Navajo people have been or the Dene people, as they're called in their language, originally, they have been, a lot of people have been having this way of life that is, fairly traditional, of herding sheep and, living off of the land, and just taking, living off of the water that just flows through the land, or that's in wells, from aquifers and stuff like that. And that isn't the case as much anymore. People are having to, instead of moving around with the water, they are having to drive long distances to get water from these community wells. And it's expensive, it's difficult, and it's just kind of, people are seeing it there as just endangering their way of life. And part of the reason too it's this way is that in I think it was saying 1868, when the Navajo Nation was made, it was, the Colorado River was excluded from the Navajo Nation. It was supposed to be for use only by people who are residents of the states around it, in the Southwest. And nowadays, well, the water usage agreement too, a century ago, it didn't even include the Navajo people, because they were seen as a separate country in a way, while still being within the US. And so they were to just kind of get water, fend for themselves in terms of water. And it worked for a long time, because there was enough water on their territory, but that's becoming more and more not the case. So that was the article that I read. And we were just talking about, I was talking about earlier, how the issue is kind of it takes, I don't know, it takes a lot of money to a lot of those houses in the reservation and everything don't have running water. They aren't attached to electrical grids. Bringing that in would cost like a fair amount of money that they haven't been able to secure fully. And some people too in the Navajo Nation, like they have reservations about being connected to the water system that like the U.S. water system that's been established because of not believing in like damming up rivers, you know, spiritually and in a spiritual perspective. So yeah, that was basically the scenario, and I just wanted to see what you guys thought about it. What themes do you feel are in it, and what do you feel is the truth about the situation there?
Yeah, well, as you were talking, like the thing I feel is that times have changed. This isn't 100 years ago, anymore, or even more than that. I don't know, but there just really needs to be a conversation that needs to be had about this. Like, I feel like there is definitely a divine solution and like a compromise or just a solution to this that where the Navajo people can still have their like core values honored, but be included with the water that they need. And even if it is a bit more modern, like, I don't know, I feel like there's definitely a compromise that can be made here where the water is shared and they're getting what they need. And I don't know. I feel like it can be solved, but with both parties just coming together,
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think there's a part of me that when I listen to the story and kind of just feel into the energy, it feels like the underlying energies and energy of separation and lack. So the perception that there's not enough. And then the other part is also almost an erosion of the strength of the divine feminine, given that the Navajo people are very paternalistic. So it's the women that rear the animals, that run the land, and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's a disconnect between that cooperation between the masculine divine energy and the feminine divine energy in terms of finding a healthy solution to the problem. Like there's the spiritual component, there's their spiritual component around not necessarily wanting to dam up water, but also that the thing that's probably come up a couple of times over various conversations is this concept of exclusion and still not being brought into the fold. So it feels like it's playing out on multiple fronts, but the core of it is that there's almost the sense that there isn't enough to sustain everybody, and that there isn't a sense of healing that exclusion that has been historical for some of those tribes and nations before.
Yeah.
I feel there is definitely, you bring up a good point, definitely. And I think when this water system was created a century or two ago, I don't think anybody thought that the situation would change, that the river would dry up and that they would have to come up with something new. And what you were sharing, Grendel, made me think of like the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. Like the spiritual reason behind the COVID pandemic is that people wanted to live separate. So we manifested that world pandemic in a sense, in a way that made us truly experience separation in many parts of our lives and made us realize that we need each other to live together. And so, in a sense, it was that karma that we talked about, I think, in the very first few conversations about seeking harmony. But then, in this situation, I think maybe because the system was brought up on separation of the land and separation of nations, instead of having, this natural flow of the system so that it could be brought up to everyone if they wanted to, or that they could be given the choice to have it if they wanted to. Well, maybe it brought up, some karma and some real reflection to be had there, in the sense that more than anything, we can't live separated right now in the world. I was thinking about that like yesterday, and it's true. We can't live separated. We can't live in a system where we don't account for others, and that's come up a lot, I think, in our conversations, because like even when countries seem like enemies on the public scene, they still needed to trade with each other and communicate with each other and have diplomacy, And so I definitely agree with Isaiah in the sense that there needs to be a conversation there. Obviously, there is no easy solution quite yet, or it's not obvious to us, but we need to at least start the conversation, between the two parties, because obviously we're not gonna let them die from lack of water or from having to, abandon their land or their work just to go fetch water miles away. And I don't know, how do you guys feel about all that karma thing and the system being brought up on separation?
Yeah, I agree with that. When you were saying karma, whose karma were you talking? Like, you saying all parties involved are kind of facing the results of that choice of separateness?
Yeah, definitely. It's not. Yeah, it's just like there was a choice made, and in both parties, I don't think it was that obvious.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was still a system that was brought up on separation spiritually.
Yeah.
And even politically,
Yeah.
So yeah, we're definitely facing that. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Maybe the things that will come about that is more cooperation, more partnership between the Navajo people and the state. But yeah, I do think that they're definitely living the consequences of choices made in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like there's another core piece of healing in terms of believing that you can be taken from. And so what is happening is that resources are continuously being stripped from that nation. And I feel like the healing there is to connect back to the feeling of completion, the feeling of having and sharing and contributing. And I think that's kind of what's come up in past conversations around other tribal nations where there was the separation of kids from their families and all of those kind of things. All of these things are surfacing very much around the same topic of lack, the topic of almost desperation, the topic of requiring a level of reparation or repair. So there's definitely a swing shift in consciousness to say cooperation is required. We are required to work together to find the solution and not necessarily bail each other out. And that is so not making other people responsible for the solution, which is what we're also seeing in terms of some of these countries at war right now. It's like there's support from a distance, as in saying, stand your ground, be strong, we support you, but you need to lead the charge. And it kind of feels like a very similar
That is true. That's the theme. I didn't see that when I was like picking out these like different articles. I was like, oh, this seems good. But yeah, I feel like that is a theme though. Yeah. I feel like the theme too, well, I'm sorry, I mean, with this one, this topic, this story, I feel like there's a sense of like, probably with everything that happened, like all the trauma and all the violence, the betrayal that Native Americans experienced in dealing with like the white Americans, the settlers, and that they feel like it's better to maintain separation because there's no way to have a healthy relationship there. And if just like having, just you know, like trauma there and stuff. And so I think that needs to just continue to be felt and healed and looked at and reconsidered, because like on one hand, there's like you being proudly yourself and standing up for yourself in this relationship is like really essential, and it's important that pattern is interrupted of being like you said, taken from. But at the same time, like there is something that feels like heavy or sad about the separation, and that there should, because connection is natural and there's no reason without the blocks to it. There's no reason not to have connection. Not that you're obligated to, but that, so I think that's what this is bringing up, really. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to like face the trauma instead of just remaining separate, and once that's faced, then I think there would be a lot more like harmony there. It's definitely deep, but this opportunity is perfect to begin facing it, and addressing the trauma that's there.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Yeah, I do feel that in some Black territories, not in the United States, but this like will to live separately and then experiencing the accrued karma of like living separately. They think that they're doing themselves like good and keeping safe by living separately, but it's just like it creates sometimes situations of poverty or like health risk, and feel like they're being abandoned when they need that cooperation, So yeah, I definitely feel that. And I wanted to say also, this discussion reminds me that like a year and a half ago, Jeff and Julia went to Sedona, and they visited like Native American religious infrastructure, I think, religious sites. And after that, they were talking about like the the strength and weaknesses of like every cultures, and like how every cultures have this strength. And we're kind of like right now coming into studying like the weaknesses of some of them and what made them fall, basically, what made them not last. And I guess Native Americans are learning that their culture is spiritually and in terms of health, like very good, like something of an example for the rest of the world. But they can't maybe like keep separated or keep moving around. They need to, as you said, like ground and feel their feelings and face what is the situation right now in like the place they're in, like both physically and maybe spiritually and mentally. Maybe that's something to consider. I don't know much about like all the cultures, Native American cultures, but I definitely think on the other side, for Americans, like a lot is done for entrepreneurs and living independently.
Mm-hmm.
My English is not good today, but whatever. But like in terms of like society as a group, there are still like steps to go to, and we're definitely seeing the weaknesses in the system. So it looks externally like the challenges of both parties are very different, and like they're very different, but actually they're facing the exact same thing, just not in the same way. And maybe the cultures are not the same and they're not going to heal exactly in the same way, but like this proves that this is a challenge to heal on both sides, and that they need to do it together, or at least like learn the lesson, the final lesson that things need to be done together. Maybe that's what it is bringing it for them. Yeah, Granville.
I feel like you've touched on an important point in highlighting or drawing awareness to the deep desire for independence. And so that for me, what I feel is playing out or has played out is that deep desire for independence has led to significant amounts of self-isolation without self-sufficiency. So as opposed to forming healthy trade relations, healthy cooperation relationships, it's been very self-isolating in that there's been a deep desire to assert a strong level of independence. And what is probably required is a healthy respect for levels of individuality within circles of cooperation, so that that individuality almost forms the cogs that drive those circles of cooperation, literally the mechanics of operation. And it's really what is required. It's like some things just require a very mechanical way of doing things that allows for each part to do its part and not to absorb the function of another part.
Yeah, we definitely know that hyper independence is not good. It's just like usually a sign of trauma.
Yeah.
And maybe like they thought that they were being self-sufficient. Exhibit A, like a century ago, nobody would have thought that the rivers would dry up. So they thought they had a system forever. And so what God is saying is like, hey, maybe look here, self-sufficiency doesn't actually look that way. Maybe it looks like oneness, but having freedom, individual freedom within that oneness.
Or partnership within that oneness.
Mm-hmm.
Really, and it's really not seeing competing priorities, but conjoint priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So everything kind of needs to all work in a certain direction. And it's literally the nature of people as we are. There's a requirement for evolution. And so the land is going to evolve as well. And the level of resources that you can draw from the land is going to evolve. And it just feeds into this, the next conversation, well, the next layer of conversation, that there have been climate shifts, you know, and that there's a requirement for more efficiency in drawing from the planet that we live on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true. I feel like we've gone so many layers with this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was great to touch on everything, I think. Yeah, how do you guys feel about moving towards the next topic?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically our next topic is about Ukraine and Taiwan. And we might be wondering, like, well, what do these two countries and territories have in common? But like, I think a lot of people know that right now they both face threats to their independence, which is funny because we just talked about that. And maybe they face it in different ways because like they have a different history and because Taiwan has such a complex situation. But yeah, we have been seeing a lot of discussions around why these countries should be independent or on the, you know, under the scope of like these bigger countries like Russia or China. And what was brought up during our discussion of that is that maybe like not a lot of people are actually asking these people what they really want. And maybe they are not respecting their choice, their free will, and their freedom. And so, yeah, it's totally the contrary of what we were just discussing. But yeah, I'm curious to know from you guys, what do you think is the core of the problem there? And like, maybe you don't know yet, but like we can definitely discuss it and see where this takes us.
There's yeah, I feel like it has to do with just like, I don't know, I feel like it might be control, like just a desire to get something or just operate on control and get your good from that. Yeah, like with Ukraine, I feel like I was inspired by, I read something about how in Russia, there were 3 different schools of thought about foreign policy, I guess you could call it. And one is like I always heard it called like Europhiles, but or Atlanticists, they would say, but who like want Russia to be more connected to Europe. But it was always like more westernized. And Russia has like really moved away from that, like, right, since the Soviet Union came into being. It's never really been very like that way toward the West. And then there were people who feel like imperialism is a good idea and Russia should try to impose its reach on other countries nearby, you know. And then also the people who feel like Russia, the Slavophile movement, that is where like people feel like Russia should just be kind of self-sufficient, independent, and not really interacting too much with the world. And these three like thoughts have been kind of like competing and interacting in Russia for a long time. And now we're seeing like a resurgence of basically imperialism, you know, and maybe also some isolation, like definitely not like trying to like make Russia European and all of that. And I feel like this is a case of like the Ukrainians are like going through the same thing, like to be closer to Europe or to like be their own little Slavic, you know, country, you know. And I think maybe some people, a few, wanted to like be united with Russia, but I feel like that is not the dominant thought there, you know. But for Russia, it was seen as like a way to, I don't know, like, I don't know. I can't understand what exactly is motivating this other than, I don't know. I just don't know what's motivating this invasion deep down, other than Putin's own desire to hold political power and be seen as a strong Russian leader and powerful in restoring the glory of the Soviet Union. But I just don't understand it. So that's where I'm left with this.
Well, it's insane, so I don't think we're supposed to
No,
understand
I know, but I just don't get the motive, even materially, like concretely, like
It's just
what do
power,
you get out of
you know?
it? Like definitely a lot of agriculture, you know.
The
But
mythology always says that the capital of Russia, or like the people of Russia, were born on Ukrainian land. And it's been
true.
like brought up again and again as a way to keep all these countries as satellites of Russia. So I guess there's an historical, you know, desire or grasp, I guess, or pseudo-historical thing there. But definitely pushes Russians to want to have this grasp on these things because they think that it's part of their identity. However true or false this is, because I don't think like historians are still like very doubtful about like how true this is. So yeah, and the fact that it's like anchored in the past instead of like anchored in like democracy and freedom of choice is like really indicative of how some parts of Russia might be still anchored in like a system that is older than what the westernized countries want to have as a world organization and as world peace, and what they see as good functioning of that organization, I guess. So that may be playing a part in it. I feel like Grendel is skeptical.
No, I'm not skeptical. I'm just, you know, like there's another part to it that also it kind of just, you know, it feels like if you looked at the world as a human body, and all these parts of the human body rebelling against each other, what happens? Disease happens, illness happens, sickness happens. And we're seeing that playing out in certain places where there's more desire, more need for something as almost basic and intrinsic as water. We're seeing it playing out in what is basic and intrinsic in energy, like literally a sick body can't heal itself because it has no energy. And it feels like if you looked at this picture as this global picture as a body, it's literally the body screaming for healing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I don't know, like maybe this is about, like you said, with the body and its connections. I mean, it's definitely like Ukraine and Russia figuring out like what their relationship should be. Because for Russia, there was kind of, when Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union, there's like a mix of control and like paternalism and like, you know, whatever, we're better together. Maybe like a sense of uniting against the West or like potential threats or even enemies. And I feel like there's might be even the trauma of like with Russia and with Ukraine, but more so especially with Russia, like their big thing historically was that the Mongol Empire controlled Russia, you know, the Mongols in the 13th century. And Russia became a country when Ivan the Terrible led the army to defeat the Mongols. And he was like seen as like this badass, brutal dude who like, he's like, I don't care what I have to do. You guys are leaving, you know, like merciless guy. And so that's why calling him Ivan the Terrible isn't an insult, apparently, because that's what they wanted. And I almost see like this, well, because, yeah, because why would you call your leader that, you know, and say that he's awesome?
Well,
but
because he was terrible, that's why.
No, it's not terrible like ужасный. Terrible, Grozny means like terrible as in the great and terrible. Like if you fuck with him,
Yeah.
you're gonna die. Not yeah.
In
But
French, it has the same meaning as well. It's like
cool.
the terrible, like we're terrible, you know? It's not like, oh, we're terrible.
Yeah.
But that level of force and fight is terrifying. So it makes sense that they would call the person Ivan the Terrible or any other acronym that would work to highlight the almost abusive power that stands behind the name.
Well, there were all, at the time of Ivan the Terrible, there were all leaders of like the barbaric people. I don't know. So it was definitely like, yeah, maybe, as I said, there's like...
What?
Yeah.
Uncivilized.
Oh, uncivilized. Yeah.
Probably not uncivilized, but it's like, but medieval, I don't know, kind of way of exercising power. So maybe like, you know, the loss of power for some countries means that you have to go back to this like attempts of force to kind of reclaim your power. But I wanted to know, like, do you think, you know, Russian and Chinese leaders have maybe this false sense of unification, you know, that pushes them to want peace by like conquering people or uniting people against their will, you know?
That's an interesting question. So like almost at the core, I feel like the answer would be no.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to say it's a qualified no, because I feel like there is a type of desire for a type of peace, I feel like they believe that the means justify the end, but it's not a commonly shared perception amongst the rest of the global citizens.
Yeah.
I also feel like there's the other hand of fighting evolution once again. So there needs to be evolution, there needs to be shedding of old systems so that possibly newer, better, healthier systems can take its place. I just feel like they're bucking against that shift, that transformation.
I do feel that too, because like on the scale of human history, freedom and free will are very, very, very recent. You know, very, very recent like acquirements of human rights and things that some countries even today don't believe into. And that's why they're like experiencing like sickness and war and karma in that sense, or like projecting that on others, you know. And that's what China has been demonstrating, is that people, their citizens, have to sacrifice for the good of the whole country. Mm-hmm. And so their freedom is not even a question there. And that's why it makes sense for the state to watch over them and watch over their electronic devices and control them and kind of rate them into like good or bad citizens, because that's, you know, control, or like a view of a unified country that doesn't include the value of freedom in there, doesn't need to have you know, the agreement of their society. Or maybe they don't think they need to have the agreement of their society, because all of these countries are experiencing pushback, because the people, whether it seems like it or not, are still sovereign of the choices of their country. And it's still 2022, and the world is still at large choosing peace and freedom. And that's why we're seeing, you know, to some extent, I think, pushback against like military drafting in Russia, pushback and questions against like, where are the Chinese people's savings and finances after having saved and given to the government for so many years? And where are their basically buildings and apartments? And Iran with pushback and saying that actually religion and applying the religion means that we all have the free will to interpret this religion in our own lives, and that the government shouldn't be controlling it to the extent that people are dying, to apply this nationwide laws, you know. So yeah, just grounding that thought in people are still sovereign, but I do think there is a distorted sense of idealism or how the country should be, or believing that you're gonna have maybe heaven or peace by controlling people, which is a sick thought in itself. That's something that people are not even conscious of. So while, you know, all these tactical moves and wars don't even make sense to us on the surface, I think that at the core there are many, many reasons, and maybe spiritual thoughts and choices that can explain why, you know, there are threats to freedom today, which is kind of surprising, but also not a lot, considering like all that there is to unpack there.
So I agree with you that there's again, it's like it's one of those multifaceted ones where it depends on which lens you look at it, which angle you look at it from, and where you're shining the light onto, and you're going to see components. But I feel like if you look at where the majority of the conflicts are happening right now, it's literally in places where people have, to an extent, given up their individual sovereignty. So they have given up their individual right and are not actually standing in their individual power. And again, like in standing in your individual power doesn't mean you have to exercise it over somebody else. And by extension, it's likely that you're not going to be in the space that your reality shows that power is so powerfully being exercised over you. So there's this place which I feel like there is a perception of a lack of individual power. And so people are becoming much more demonstrative about grabbing back their power.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that these places like Ukraine and Taiwan can feel so irritating to the regimes in power is because simply that maybe the people in Russia or the people in China, the people would see that there are other people who are like close to them, maybe even culturally, that are living differently, and that are living under this more free model where people are taking more individual power. They're claiming more individual power for themselves. They're seeing that, and so they might be like, well, why can't we also, like, why are these people living better, or why can't I also, because I think the thing about it is it reminds me of like a very traditional, like patriarchal family type of model where there's the big figure in the family is like the father, who is like, instead of doing his role in a way that is, loving and where everyone has power of their own and also their place in the family, it's like the man is like the one who calls the shots, who controls, who is like the strong one, and everyone else is like weak and vulnerable and like his burden to take care of, and everything like that. And it's kind of a model that there's like fear in it, there's abuse, codependency, versus a model where there's not codependency. Everyone stands in their power. Everyone has like their own role and everything in the family. And there's like equality, between man and woman, and that kind of thing, like, or whatever, the two spouses in the family. I feel like that's what this is reflecting. And I think that the problem with the model that is more like controlling is that because it's based in fear and control, it can't be as prosperous. And we see that in China and Russia, that innovation is a lot less there than in countries that are democratic and more open and liberal. And this system needs to be kept by force and control and fear. It can't just, it will eventually crumble. And other examples of a system that isn't that are seen as a threat to it. I think that that's what is happening. And yeah, and I think that it's okay that should be challenged, and that falls apart, and there's economic upheaval that comes with that. But yeah, I think some people might feel scared of the economic upheaval and the political upheaval that this could cause, of this system kind of falling apart or changing. But it's necessary because it can't go on forever like that. And so I think that's what Elon Musk's comments too about Ukraine and Taiwan, recommending that they just give concessions to these other countries to end the war. Like, I think that's his view, just like keep the status quo, keep things as they are, allow this old system so that we don't rock the boat, because we need a global economic stability. And it's like, but that's not stability because it's built on, you know, control. Horribleness. It's built on horribleness. You know, yeah. And people get tired of horribleness. Yes, horribleness. Yeah. 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 Ужасность. Yeah.
And why yeah, it's basically like the spiritual journey. We shouldn't give in to fear when we're in that state of upheaval or that cave of fear. And I think like the economical upheaval is our global cave of fear, in many, many ways, because it affects also like climate change and things like that. But I think there's a better tomorrow. Like, don't give in at the last second. Don't turn back. Why would these countries turn back? Like, why would Ukraine turn back when they've gained even more territory on Russia? That wouldn't make sense. That would be like claiming victory and then giving it all to the fire. And we have to trust God there and not respond to fear. That's it.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, I guess the truth is that these systems are crumbling. Like, that's what we're witnessing right now, is because they can't last, because it's it doesn't respect like human beings at the core, you know. So you know, we're seeing Ukraine, they are standing up for themselves, they are choosing their independence, and we're seeing them have success, and it is a part of taking down these like the old systems and implementing the ones that value humans at the core.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Speaking of upheaval, we have another upheaval, but this time political, to talk about, which is the military coup, the coup in Burkina Faso.
Yeah, you know what's cool? I learned that the name Burkina Faso, it means the land of incorruptible people.
Oh.
Yeah. I thought that was cool. It was awesome because
that's very sweet. It was a very like prosperous country for quite a few years. In some aspects. And I feel like the main thing that we're seeing right now is that they're trying to attack like the French embassy and like blame France for like many of their problems, which is something that has to do with like neo-colonialism and like French involvement in like the parts that were still poor. And it's interesting to see how Russia is playing a part in like supporting them and taking down like French infrastructures. And it kind of feels like the Cold War in their involvement in like what we used to call the third world countries, and kind of trying to play the game of war indirectly by playing a game in this country. So yeah, it feels very much like something that will have an international impact, an African impact, and an international impact too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but also there's gains at the cost of something. And those trade-offs feels like the trade-offs are where the problem sits. That especially with like Burkina Faso, where they're trying to play both sides or appease Russia, but not really get them entrenched into the country, because then you can't really get them out. It's kind of like playing a game of chess against yourself. Like at some point there's going to be a level of almost schizophrenic behavior, because you kind of have both sides and you're trying to keep them independent, and by design our consciousness is not meant to have these independent components. It doesn't work.
Or to have status quo. Or to have status quo in that sense.
You know, so I feel like they're playing a dangerous game, and I also feel like that dangerous game is likely to blow up in their faces, because they want to use the power of the aggressor, but they don't want to give the aggressor a foothold. I feel like it's a very dangerous game. And that's why you kind of have to look at it in comparison and at the core of it and go like, what are they actually trying to achieve? And the fact for me is like they're trying to have the bread brought to them, buttered, and eat it, and not do anything for it.
Yeah, because they need to, they have to really assert and decide for themselves what they want. Like people in these various countries in Africa, like the Sahel and Sub-Saharan Africa, because the thing is like, in France had been supporting militarily against these like Islamic insurgencies, like the terrorism. And so there's this conflict in the sense of like somebody must win, basically, like the Islamic insurgency and like Islamic, I guess, people in the countries versus like the Christian elements of the country, right? And so there's a sense of like struggle there where there can't be there has to be like dominance of one over the other, or we can't coexist. And some of the countries are turning to Russia to try to put down the Islamic insurgencies, because of seeing Russia as being like Ivan the Terrible, like ruthless, powerful, has no scruples, and doesn't have the history of colonial control that France has, over Africa. And I also heard that France wants to like encourage some of these governments to adopt more of like a Western style human rights just human rights enshrined in the government. And Russia encourages no such thing. There is no requirement from Russia, like human rights.
No requirements.
Well, there's different requirements.
Right.
Like with Russia
hidden
and China,
requirements.
With Russia and China, they're like, we want to take your resources over, please, and we want to take your country over, please, and in exchange for whatever. So
I just want to quickly add that Macron has a politics of like giving everyone more independence, and I think like it's angering a lot of communities, African or Black, and Maybe because they're not like used to working for their like spiritual development by themselves. But maybe that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Definitely a discussion for another day. So thank you everybody for today's conversation. We have reached our hour. So to everybody that's followed us, please like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous conversations. And we look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.